Hello, hello. So, I'm doing something a little different today. What's up, Ben? I decided that just because of what has going on the East Coast with all the smoke and the wildfires and things, and I think people could probably use a lift in spirits, that we're going to, instead of the regularly scheduled gaming tonight from 7 to 9, I'm actually going to spend the day reading the entire book, Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. That's by Leah Lakshmi Peepsna Samara Sinha. And I'm probably I don't want to be another person butchering someone's name, so we're just gonna go by Leah, I think, whenever I reference the author. But I'm gonna start by reading the little write-up. What's up? What's up? Welcome. We're reading Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. Yeah, the air quality stuff. I think there's so much that, like I said, there's so much that's forthcoming with what's happening just with the entire situation. And I think what people could really use right now is just something to lift spirits and see what can be done. And I feel like this is a book that I've been meaning to read. And I was just saying over the last few days that I don't want to start a new book because I have already started two books. We're reading Susan Sontag's Illness as Metaphor, and then I started The Lonely Century. But so I decided that because I know that we need to hear what this book has to say right now and what Leah wrote about, that I'm literally going to read the entire book today. So obviously you're welcome. You don't have to stay the whole time by any means. No one obviously ever has to be here, but you're welcome to come and go as you please, but please share the live because I think people really need to hear this right now. So, as usual, when I start reading a book, I'm going to start reading what's on the website, and then we're just going to get right into it. So, on their website, Leah says Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice is. Oh, actually, let me turn on captions real quick. So, for anyone that doesn't know, I started at Twitch a little bit over a week ago, and I have closed captions on my Twitch. So, if anyone could benefit from that or would just prefer to have that, you can see it's populating in real time. So, that's there. But I'm going to start, like I said, by reading the description of it that's on Leah's website. So, she says, or they say, actually, I don't see what their pronouns anywhere, so I'm just going to go by they. But yeah, in their new collection of essays, Lambda Literary Award-winning writer and disability justice activist Leah Lakshmi Peepsna Samara Sinha explores the politics and realities of disability justice, a movement that centers the lives and leadership of sick and disabled, queer, trans, black, and brown people with knowledge and gifts for all. Care Work is a mapping of access as radical love, a celebration of the work that sick and disabled queer people of color are doing to find each other and to build power and community, and a toolkit for everyone who wants to build radically resilient communities of liberation where no one is left behind. Powerful and passionate care work is a crucial and necessary call to arms. So as you can see, I think that it's truly what people could use right now. If anything, just background noise. But yeah, let's get into it. This came out in 2018, so it's been around for a little while, and I've been meaning to read it. And as I've said since starting the Twitch, this is just an opportunity for me to finally do any post-PhD reading. It both gets me to do it and I think is beneficial since all the paywalls between the public and knowledge. So let's start with the thanks and acknowledgement, shall we? This book was written in the matrix of many sick and disabled femme of color care webs in unceded and occupied Toronto dish with one spoon territories, Alone territories, Oakland, California, and my current home in South Seattle on Duwamish territories governed by the Treaty of Point Elliott, as well as on a lot of planes, trains, and megabuses. No matter where I was paying rent, these pieces were mostly written in the majestic disabled revolutionary space of writing from my bed in old sleep pants. So thank you to this decolonial queer disabled bed space of wild disabled femme of color dreams. This book is also empathetically not the product of a single smart and special person's brain. It was made through many community conversations, organizing efforts, arguments, fuck ups, terrible challenges, and crazy capital C, brilliant ideas and leaps of faith. These ideas were crafted by collective disabled genius, science, and labor. I'm not the one right kind of cripple, the kind that is convenient enough to nod at and ignore all the rest. I am all the rest. So thank you beyond measure to all the people who have collectively made the disability justice movement in communities and meetings and at kitchen tables, in fem caves and online. Thank you to Sins Invalid, disabled, sick, mad, and deaf communities in Toronto, Oakland, Seattle, and beyond, the sick and disabled queers, autistic, queer, trans people of color, and SDQT POC Facebook groups, the Deaf Poets Society, the Canaries, Harriet Tubman Collective, Crip Hop Nation, Performance Disability Art PDA, QPO Cirrus, Autistic Hoya, Disability Justice Collective Seattle, and Gay SL. To Kane and shared dancing circles in Toronto and beyond, to everyone who has participated and helped create the Frida and Harriet's children writing classes online, to the disabled femme artists and organizers, black, brown, and working class, who mentored and mothered me as a young disabled femme of color writer and taught me how to steal office supplies, get grant money, and find jobs that left me time and spoons to write. Lilith Finkler, Nalo Hopkinson, Elizabeth Ruth, and Patty Byrne. Rest in power, Nicole DeMarin. There are many comrades and friends I owe my life, and also the thinking and writing in this book too, and here are some. Stacy Milburn, Neve, Camila, Mazik Bianco, Belly Rain, Lydia XZ Brown, Patty Byrne, Leroy Moore, Jonah Elaine, Daniel Cooleth Driscoll, Aurora Levins Morales, Siri Jarrell, Johnson, Maria Palacios, Carolyn Lazard, Naima Niambalo, Sirius Marcus Ware, Alina Rose, Meg Day, Elliot Fuki, Aaron Ambrose, Mia Mingus, Shada Kaftal, Dolores Tajida, Satira Mohammed, Lucy Maria Powers, Aruna Zira, Amira Mizirai. Wait, Mizire. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry, y'all. Adrian Nation, Azia, Amatula, Inber Frischman, Carrie Martha, Ki Cheng Tom, Lumpen Proletariat, Gizig Selena Isaac, Lori Erickson, E.T. Russian, Iziris Dixon, Liz Laddie, Zarifsha Krummeeks, S.B. McKenna, Amala Dublan, Tina Zavitsanos. You are the best friends for this journey, and I love being on it with you. Thank you to Lisa Ammon and Chantel Gallant, and for being my oldest sisters. To autistic and neurodivergent communities for welcoming me home. Thank you to the folks who hired me to do workshops and lectures and performances over the years, bring disability justice space onto campus, and kept me marginally employed. There are too many to name, but I want to say a special thank you to Teal Van Dyke, Matteo Medina, Samantha Levens, Cascadus, Easy Clarinet, and Tash of the D Center. Eun Jung Kim, Michael Gill, Tina Zavitsanos, Amel Dublon, and Sylvie Rosenkalt. Many of you, thank you to everyone who creates disability justice by doing the underappreciated disabled femme labor of listening, including via ASL and text and gesture and augmented communication, checking in, creating care teams and crisis teams, making soup and feeding people, helping lift heavy things, sharing cars and rides, fixing the ramp when it breaks, fundraising to buy accessible vans, sharing ramps, captioning videos, creating accessible venue lists, doing access audits, sniffing folks at the door, turning the lights down, creating ASL vlogs, and fundraising for good interpretation, co-creating fragrance-free products for black and brown hair and skin, hauling the air purifier and the access toilet seat to the show, making art in healing spaces, and passing on the last $20 and handing over to effexers. Thank you for being the Crips who show up through vomit, level 9 pain days, nervous breakdowns, neurotypical and autist oppression, and inaccessible transit. Whenever anyone asks where they can find the disability justice movement, my answer is, it's here. Lisa Factora Borkers is the dream feminist of color editor I always needed and never found till now. After decades of struggling with racist and ableist editors, where I spent most of my editing time fighting to stop them from writing all the brown working class disabled language out of my work, it has been a miraculous gift to have an incredible Filipina feminist editor who skipped all that bullshit and just focused on making this book better. I love that. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your deep brown Asian love and commitment to this work, and for your years of devotion to amplifying feminists of color survivor voices. I'm also grateful to Brian Lamb, Sinara Gesler, and the entire team at Arsenal Pulp for the risks you take to champion QT BIPOC, disabled, femme, and survivor literary voices. Throughout the 13 years I have been publishing books, it has always been important to me for my books to feature beautiful pieces of art on the cover, created by QT BIPOC artists. Thank you a million times to my friend Texta Queen and designer Oliver McPartland for making a cover beautiful enough for this book that gives a visual language to queer brown disability that breaks away from the expected. And for anyone that hasn't seen the cover, I know it's small on my Twitch, but it truly is fucking amazing. So maybe I'll leave it over there. I write this book with images and books by sick and disabled ancestors ringing my desk. I wrote this with their support and witness. Often when I got stuck, I would ask them what was needed. I call their names Baba Ibrahim, Farajaji, Audre Lorde, Frida Kahlo, Gloria Anzaldúa, Marsha P. Johnson, June Jordan, Tourette Davis, and my great auntie, Stasia Pabzina Smolin, Leslie Feinberg, Galvarino, Jericho Bolin, and Laura Hershey. Finally, thank you to my beloved Jesse Manuel Graves for your love and kindness, queens, femmes, snark, and brilliance. Every day with you is a miracle. Us finding each other and practicing love and care is our sick, disabled, and survivor ancestors' wildest dreams come true, and mine too. So that's the acknowledgements and thank you. And then there's a preface. So just for anyone that might have come in, and also thanks for everyone both on TikTok and Twitch. Just another reminder, I have closed captions that are available on my Twitch, so if you could benefit or you would just prefer that, definitely take advantage of it. So the preface is called Writing with a Movement from Bed. When I moved to Oakland in 2007, I started writing from bed. I wrote in old sleep pants, lying on a heating pad during the hours I spent in my big, sick, and disabled femme of color bed cave. I wasn't alone in this. I did so along many other sick and disabled writers making culture. Writing from bed is a time-honored disabled way of being an activist and cultural worker. It's one of the mainstream, doesn't often acknowledge, but whose lineage stretches from Frida Kahlo painting in bed to Grace Lee Boggs writing in her wheelchair at age 98. I had very good timing. I moved to Oakland just as disability justice was birthing itself as a movement. Disability justice is a term coined by Black, brown, queer, and trans members of the original Disability Justice Collective, founded in 2005 by Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, Leroy Moore, Ellie Claire, and Sebastian Margaret. Disabled, queer, and trans Black, Asian, and white activists and artists, they dreamed up a movement-building framework that would center the lives, needs, and organizing strategies of disabled, queer, and trans and/or Black and brown people marginalized from mainstream disability rights organizing's white-dominated single-issue focus. Sins Invalid, the Disability Justice Performance Collective, co-created by Patty Byrne and Leroy Moore, was based in Oakland and was shaking things up with its large-scale, beautifully produced performances about Black and brown, queer, disabled sex, bodies, and struggles. Its use of culture as a weapon to reshape people's dreams, nightmares, and future visions of disabled, Black and brown, queer liberation. The writing of disabled, queer, Black, and brown writers and activists like Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, Aurora Levins Morales, and Billy Rain was shaking things up online and in print. Their pieces being passed from hand to hand in communities I was part of. I was reading them over and over again, silently in my room, my brain breaking open. I had never seen disabled, queer, and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, QT BIPOC writers, talking about the nitty-gritty facts of our lives out loud before without apology. It felt like queer Crip of Color writers were creating space for sick and disabled queer and trans people of color to name ourselves as disabled, our kind of disabled for the first time, and talk about the shit we'd only whispered before. I gotta block this ignorant person. Let me just, and there we go. Much better. If anyone else would like to volunteer to be blocked, you're totally, you're welcome to also join the club. We were finding ourselves and each other and making sick and disabled QT BIPOC space that held our desires and our stories. It felt like some non-disabled queers and activists were paying attention, being forced to deal with ableism and with us, whether or not they were thrilled about it. As disability justice was giving birth to itself as a movement, I got to be part of it as a cultural worker, often working from bed. As I was able to perform with Sins Invalid and experience its exquisitely high level of access for disabled artists, that experience refused to stay in one little corner of my life. I wanted all the QT BIPOC cultural spaces I took part in to be that accessible, that whole. I wrote pieces about cross-disability access that were tools I and other disabled BIPOC queers and allies used to help create the first Creating Collective Access Network, an experiment in access made by and for QT BIPOC disabled people at the 2010 Allied Media Conference, AMC, and U.S. Social Forum, USSF, that broke away from traditional formats of access as service begrudgingly offered to disabled people by non-disabled people who feel grumpy about it, to access as a collective joy and offering we can give to each other. Also, welcome Dookie Mookie. TikTok giving you the meanies. Just one I saw. Maybe this other person. I can't tell if Marshmallow Marsh 27 is actually like a troll or if they're just bringing in more engagement. But anyone who is here, thank you for being here. We're reading Care Work. Finding other disabled QT BIPOC creators and building with them prompted me to write about what it meant to create performing arts spaces where access was a central part of the performance, not an afterthought. As queers and femmes in my communities, particularly queer femmes of color and multiply marginalized femmes, continued to kill themselves, I wrote about suicidality as an ever-present reality in our communities. I should say too, of course, like just in case anyone's not familiar with this book, like it should be an ongoing understanding that the kind of content that's in it would be something where, you know, make sure that you understand the difficulty and deepness of the topic at hand, but the way that the liberatory lens, of course, is going to frame it in all of its realities and all of its liberatory potentials while still discussing the realities of the difficulty that is existing in systems of oppression. So, what's up, Taylor? Welcome. I know it's so good. We're still just in the preface. For anyone that's just coming in, I'm reading the entire book, Care Work, by Leah Lakshmi Peepsna Samara Sinha. So, as I finally finished my first memoir after 10 years of work, I wrote about what it takes to write femme of color disabled trauma stories and how survivorhood is part of disability justice. Everyone drink water, by the way. Whenever I drink water, just take it as your sign to also remember to drink water. I wrote these pieces not out of a desire for fame or cultural capital, but to be useful. Culture makes culture. When there's no space to talk about disability in art, when people at the Poetry Slam respond to your Crip poem with "how touching" and give you sad face or just look confused, disabled artists of color won't make disabled art. When there are a few QT BIPOC art spaces, QT BIPOC tend to think art isn't a viable career option. Disability justice allowed me to understand that me writing from my sickbed wasn't me being weak or uncool or not a real writer, but a time-honored Crip creative practice. And that understanding allowed me to finally write from a disabled space for and about sick and disabled people, including myself, without feeling like I was writing about boring, private things that no one would understand. This is a big deal, because while I got sick with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue immune deficiency syndrome, CFIDS, in 1997, and have been a neurodivergent survivor of violence with complex PTSD all my life, I didn't write or publish anything about disability until Body Map, My third book of poetry came out in 2015. It was almost 20 years since I'd first become chronically ill and a decade into publishing my books. Before I had the great good fortune to run into Sins Invalid and other queer people of color talking and writing about disability, I, like many other QT BIPOC I knew, thought of disability as something that you weren't allowed to talk or write about in QT BIPOC culture. Nowhere in the QT BIPOC politicized spoken word communities I was part of, or wanted to be cool enough to be part of, in the early 2000s, do I remember anyone ever doing poetry about disability or thinking about access at all. Do you remember any poems about disability justice making it into Def Poetry Jam? I don't. And that state of affairs continued into my adult life in the able-bodied QT BIPOC artist community. It's not like anyone came right out and said they hated disabled people, but disability was depressing or embarrassing to write about, or just something that most people wouldn't be able to relate to as a subject. There was a huge echoing silence in POC and or queer activist communities. I had a few friends who whispered to each other about our chronic illnesses, but the most we could say was, "It sucks, right?" We had no idea we could be part of a community, a history, a movement. But in the past decade, disability justice culture has bloomed through the hard work of disabled people who are also queer feminists of color, and it's not like that anymore, at least not all of the time. It's not that ableist disregard for crip lives, both in the mainstream and inside our movements and communities, doesn't still exist. But I no longer worry that every single person I encounter at an event will be awkward or pity me or just not get it. I do not feel like I'm the only person I know who is talking about disability justice. I no longer feel like one of a tiny handful of people talking about access or worry that if I produce a crip show, of course no one will come to it. I think more people know that not all disabled people are white. When I first started offering sick and disabled writing workshops for queer and trans people of color around 2010, sometimes no one would come out, or just a few people, or the idea would be shot down because the organizers were sure no one would come. But when I went on tour with Body Map in 2015 and read explicitly disability-focused work, almost all of my gigs were standing and sitting room only. When I did a writing workshop by and for sick and disabled people of color at the 2015 Queer Students of Color Conference, the room was spilling over with queer people of color who wanted to talk and write about everything from pesticide exposures they had received doing farm work to intergenerational trauma. Disabled Black and brown queer voices are no longer uncommon on popular feminist and queer blogs like The Body Is Not an Apology, Everyday Feminism, Guts, and Autostraddle, and I see articles including and thinking about ableism instead of forgetting about it. Morning Uberlord. We're reading Care Work. The Disability Visibility Project, Wear Your Voice, the Spoonie Collective, the Deaf Poets Society, Autistic Hoya, Crip Hop Nation, and many other sites by and for intersectional disabled people are live. Everywhere people are talking about care work, emotional labor, femme-emotional labor, access, and crip skills and science. So beyond, of course, reading this because of what's going on the East Coast, and I believe we all could use a little bit of a liberatory reminder today, I'm also reading it because this book came out in 2018, and I want people to think about it in the current COVID era and what we can gain from it and what we can't forget about it. None of this happened because the able-bodied people decided to be nice to the cripples. It happened because disabled, queer, and trans people of color started organizing, often with femme-disabled, Black, and brown queer people in the lead. Much of that work has been done through writing, storytelling, and art as activism. Much of our coming together has been through zines, online disabled QT, POC communities, Tumblr, and blog and social media posts, or through 3 people getting together at a kitchen table or a group Skype call to start to hesitantly talk about our lives, organize a meal train, share pills and tips, or post the thoughts about activism and survival we have at 2 a.m. I saw your question, Hermes Himbo. So there's a bunch of wildfire smoke from Canada, and it's all over the East Coast, to the point where many people can't open their doors or windows because it will come in, and people are recommending to put like wet towels where there's cracks because the air quality is so bad. The Twitch stream is a better experience all around. Thank you, Ed, I appreciate you. I just started the Twitch a week ago, so I definitely recommend it, and like I said, there's closed captions over there if anyone could benefit from them. In writing this book, I wanted to capture some of this history as it's being made and dreamed. Oh, I forgot to actually wait. No, okay. That was a couple sentences that were important. I skipped over. It is underdocumented, private work often seen as not real activism, but it is the realest activism there is. This is how disability justice, art, and activism change the world and save lives. In writing this book, I wanted to capture some of this history as it is being made and dreamed. This is what I'm always talking about. When people dismiss the validity of online activism, it's an inherently ableist stance. It's something that the system uses as a rhetorical means of control that just further dehumanizes anyone with disabilities that does work like this. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I know I didn't hear that the moon was red yesterday, but who knows? Yeah, for sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's definitely, there's maps and stuff. So, yeah, maybe do a little Googling. It's widespread, especially around like New York. Concrete tools, liberation, politics, and poetry. This is disability justice. I'd like to offer a quick definition and history of what we mean when we say the words disability justice. This is important for so many reasons, but especially because our work and terminology are in danger, now and always, of having the fact that they were invented by Black, Indigenous, and people of color erased and their politics watered down. There's a specific danger in that happening with disability justice, as disabled Black and Brown creators face a specific invisibilization and erasure of our political and cultural work. I want to both give the Black and Brown people and femmes who invented the term credit and be clear about what DJ means and what it doesn't. In the words of Sins Invalid co-founder and executive director Patty Byrne, and this is a quote, while a concrete and radical move forward towards justice for disabled people, the disability rights movement simultaneously invisibilized the lives of peoples who lived at intersecting junctures of oppression: disabled people of color, immigrants with disabilities, queers with disabilities, trans and gender nonconforming people with disabilities, people with disabilities who are houseless, people with disabilities who are incarcerated, people with disabilities who have had their ancestral land stolen, amongst others. Disability Disability justice activists, organizers, and cultural workers understand that able-bodied supremacy has been formed in relation to other systems of domination and exploitation. The histories of white supremacy and ableism are inextricably intertwined, both forged in the crucible of colonial conquest and capitalist domination. One cannot look at the history of U.S. slavery, the stealing of indigenous lands, and U.S. imperialism without seeing the way that white supremacy leverages ableism to create a subjected other that is deemed less worthy, abled, smart, capable. We cannot comprehend ableism without grasping its interrelations with heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism, and capitalism. Each system benefits from extracting profits and status from the subjugated other. 500 plus years of violence against Black and Brown communities includes 500 plus years of bodies and minds deemed dangerous by being non-normative. A disability justice framework understands that all bodies are unique and essential, that all bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We know that we are powerful not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. Disability justice holds a vision born out of collective struggle, drawing upon the legacies of cultural and spiritual resistance within 1,000 underground paths, igniting small, persistent fires of rebellion in everyday life. Disabled people of the global majority, Black and Brown people, share common ground confronting and subverting colonial powers in our struggle for life and justice. There has always been resistance to all forms of oppression, as we know through our bones that there have simultaneously been disabled people visioning a world where we flourish that values and celebrates us in all our myriad beauty. And that was the end of the quote. To me, disability justice means a political movement and many interlocking communities where disability is not defined in white terms or male terms or straight terms. Disability justice is to the disability rights movement what the environmental justice movement is to the mainstream environmental movement. And as I say lately, and I'm seeing more people pick up, obviously that's why we need to understand COVID as an environmental injustice and racism issue, because it is. Disability justice centers sick and disabled people of color, queer and trans disabled folks of color, and everyone who is marginalized in mainstream disability organizing. More than that, disability justice asserts that ableism helps make racism, Christian supremacy, sexism, and queer and transphobia possible, and that all those systems of oppression are locked up tight. It insists that we organize from our sick, disabled, broken, beautiful, as Alexis Pauline Gumbs puts it, bodies, wisdom, need, and desire. It means looking at how indigenous and black and brown traditions value sick and disabled folks, not as magical cripples, but as people of difference whose body spirits have valuable smarts. At how in BIPOC communities being sick or disabled can just be life, and also at how sick and disabled BIPOC are criminalized. It means asserting a vision of liberation in which destroying ableism is part of social justice. It means the hotness, smarts, and value of our sick and disabled bodies. That means we are not left behind. We are beloved, kindred, needed. When we do disability justice work, it becomes impossible to look at disability and not examine how colonialism created it. It becomes a priority to look at indigenous ways of perceiving and understanding disability, for example. It becomes a space where we see that disability is all up in black and brown, queer, trans communities, from Henrietta Lacks to Harriet Tubman, from the Black Panther Party's active support for disabled organizers' 2-month occupation of the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, to force the passage of Section 504, the law mandating disabled access to public spaces and transportation, to the chronic illness and disability stories of second-wave queer feminists of color like Sylvia Riviera, June Jordan, Gloria Anzaldúa, Audre Lorde, Marsha P. Johnson, and Barbara Cameron, whose lives are marked by bodily difference, trauma surviving brilliance, and chronic illness, but who mostly never use the term disabled to refer to themselves. Many of us rely on state funding and services to survive and fight for things like the Affordable Care Act, ACA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, to remain protected and expanded. But our focus is less on civil rights legislation as the only solution to ableism, and more on a vision of liberation that understands that the state was built on racist, colonialist ableism, and will not save us, because it was created to kill us. A movement where, in the words of Sin's Invalid, we move together, but no body left behind. To me, one quality of disability justice culture is that it is simultaneously beautiful and practical. Poetry and dance are as valuable as a blog post about access hacks because they're equally important and interdependent. This book is an example of that both and. In this mosaic, you will find pieces of personal testimony and poetry, mediations on Gloria Anzaldúa and Prince as disabled queer black and brown figures, grassroots intellectual examinations of accessible performance spaces as prefigurative politics, and tips for how to tour as a chronically ill artist, and notes on where to get accessible fragrance-free POC hair products. That is not usual, and that is on purpose. Like disability justice itself as a framework and culture, this book is a mix of very concrete tools and personal essays. I hesitated a bit to include the former. Serious cultural work isn't supposed to include lists of fragrance-free curly hair products or instructions about how to tour while sick and hurt less, right? But fuck that. The making of disability justice lives in the realm of thinking and talking and knowledge making in art and sky. But it also lives on how to rent an accessible porta potty for an accessible except the bathroom event space, how to mix coconut oil and aloe, to make a fragrance-free hair lotion that works for curly and kinky BIPOC hair, how to learn to care for each other when everyone is sick, tired, crazy, and brilliant, and neither is possible without the other. Care work in the apocalypse. When I began working on this book in July 2016, right after I quit the job at a giant corporate university that I had hoped would be an accessible way of making a living, but ended up giving me pneumonia for 3 months, I thought I'd just slap together a collection of all the pieces of writing I'd done over the past decade. Essays about curating QT BIPOC performance art, the Femme Shark Manifesto. But as I edited this book over the summer of 2017, I realized that the pieces that were the most prominent were all the ones I'd written about disability justice and care labor in many forms. The theme of care work as a place where disability justice and queer femme emotional labor intersect came to me. Nothing about us without us is a disability rights slogan that was created by South African disability rights groups in the 1980s. A more recent disability justice slogan I have heard that I first saw in an image Sins Invalid created in protests of the killing intersections of racism and ableism in the Israeli bombardment of Gaza in the summer of 2014 is to exist is to resist. This phrase speaks to the ways in which everyday struggles to live and survive by sick and disabled QT BIPOC are real activism. When you're lying in bed trying to breathe, or talking someone through a panic attack, or fighting Medicaid or the queer club to let you in, that is resistance. And in this political moment where Trump is attempting to kill sick and disabled people by ending Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act and the ADA were the things that do save us, emergent airport demonstrations against Trump's Islamophobic and racist travel and immigration bans, care webs where we raise money for medical and housing surpluses, are so clearly not the state. This book feels timely. Again, this book came out in 2018. So this was just a couple years before COVID started. I also wrote this book with a lot of anxiety. I was very conscious during the process of compiling and editing this book that it would be the first on disability justice by a queer writer of color that was not self or micro press published. This is huge and telling. That the racism and ableism of the publishing industry mean there are barely any popular books out there on disability, and the vast majority of them are written by white disabled people. Like every other disabled writer I know, I've been asked if I think readers will really know what ableism is. I've had pieces about disability politics be read with incomprehension by editors who said, "Don't you want to say more about your illness?" And were confused that I'm not telling the only disabled story they can comprehend, a simple, tragic, yet uplifting tale where I talk about my illness and how I have overcome it, but a story of collective struggle, community building, love and luck and skills. Like every disabled black and brown writer I know, I've fought to get anyone to give a shit or not just throw up their hands at how way too complicated my story is. Can't I just focus on my brownness or ableism? Because I am a cultural worker who is one disabled femme of color writer in a collective movement of many, I was clear about what I did and did not want this book to be. For the past year, I've thought a lot about what I wanted to do to intervene in the very likely reality that as I am a light-skinned, non-black, ambulatory, often verbally communicative person, mainstream media would want to cast me as the face of disability justice and thrust into the spotlight as the one expert on this wacky new movement, erasing all of my comrades and fellow artists, thinkers, and organizers, particularly those who face certain kinds of ableism that are more overt and killing than some that I face. This fear didn't come from nowhere. I had one offer to publish this book that meant very well in talking how the time I had come for a big book on disability justice, but then admitted that in mainstream publishing, unless you're willing to pitch yourself as the expert, essay books don't sell. I am and want to be very clear. I am one writer and performer in a sea of sick and disabled QT BIPOC people who are doing work in many ways all the time, as writers and activists and as everyday folks who are keeping themselves and other people alive. I do not want this to be the book on disability justice. This book is one in a garden of books that I invoke to become more abundant. Please check out the book's authors' websites and zines in the further reading and resources section for a complete view of what this world is. But for now, please come into this one and write your own. 10 Principles of Disability Justice by Patty Byrne, edited by Aurora Levins Morales and David Langstaff on behalf of Sins Invalid. From my vantage point within Sins Invalid, where we incubate both the framework and practice of disability justice, this burgeoning framework has 10 principles, each offering new opportunities for movement builders. Number 1. Intersectionality. We know that each person has multiple identities and that each identity can be a site of privilege or oppression. The mechanical workings of oppression and how they output shift depending upon the characteristics of any given institutional or interpersonal interaction. The very understanding of disability experience itself is being shaped by race, gender, class, gender expression, historical moment, relationship to colonization, and more. Number 2. Leadership of those most impacted. We know ableism exists in the context of other historical systemic oppressions. We know to truly have liberation, we must be led by those who know the most about these systems and how they work. Oh, thank you, Dookie Mookie. Number 3, anti-capitalist politic. We are anti-capitalist as the very nature of our mind bodies often resists conforming to a capitalist normative level of production. We don't believe human worth is dependent on what and how much a person can produce. We critique a concept of labor as defined by able-bodied supremacy, white supremacy, and gender normativity. We understand capitalism to be a system that promotes private wealth accumulation for some at the expense of others. Number 4, cross-movement solidarity. Necessarily cross-movement, disability justice shifts how social justice movements understand disability and contextualize ableism, lending itself towards a united front politic. Number 5, recognizing wholeness. We value our people as they are for who they are and understand that people have inherent worth outside of capitalist notions of productivity. Each person has an internal experience composed of their own thoughts, sensations, emotions, sexual fantasies, perceptions, and idiosyncrasies. Disabled people are whole people. Number 6, sustainability. We pace ourselves individually and collectively to be sustained long term. We value the teachings of our lives and bodies. We understand that our embodied experience is a critical guide and reference point, pointing us towards justice and liberation. Number 7, commitment to cross-disability solidarity. We value and honor the insights and participation of all our community members. We are committed to breaking down ableist, patriarchal, racist, class isolation between people with physical impairments, people who identify as sick or are chronically ill, psych survivors, and those who identify as crazy, neurodiverse people, people who with cognitive impairments, and people who are of a sensory minority, as we understand that isolation ultimately undermines collective liberation. Number 8, interdependence. Before the massive colonial project of Western European expansion, we understood the nature of interdependence within our communities. We see the liberation of all living systems and the land as integral to the liberation of our own communities as we all share one planet. We attempt to meet each other's needs as we build towards liberation without always reaching for state solutions that inevitably then extend its control further over our lives. Number 9, collective access. As brown, black, and queer Crips, we bring flexibility and creative nuance to engage with each other. We create and explore new ways of doing things that go beyond able-bodied minded normativity. Access needs aren't shameful. We all have various capacities which function differently in various environments. Access needs can be articulated within a community and met privately or through a collective, depending upon an individual's needs, desires, and the capacity of the group. We can share responsibility for our access needs. We can ask that our needs be met without compromising our integrity. We can balance autonomy while being in community. We can be unafraid of our vulnerabilities, knowing our strengths are respected. And number 10, collective liberation. How do we move together as people with mixed abilities, multiracial, multigendered, mixed class, across the orientation spectrum where no body mind is left behind? This is disability justice, in honoring of the long-standing legacies of resilience and resistance, which are the inheritance of all of us, whose bodies or minds will not conform. Disability justice is not yet a broad-based popular movement. Disability justice is a vision and practice of a yet to be, a map that we create with our ancestors and our great-grandchildren onward, in the width and depth of our multiplicities and histories, a movement towards a world in which every body and every mind is known as beautiful. Thanks for stopping by. Enjoy lunch. Maybe I'll see you later. All right, that ends the preface. I'm gonna take a break to use the restroom real quick. Maybe I'll put like some lo-fi on in the background actually, because that's just like nice to have on. Everyone take a little break, maybe drink some water. I'm gonna do that too. And we'll be right back.
All right, welcome back.
So, for anyone that's just joining, or maybe anyone that just wants a little reminder, so I'm reading the entire book, Care Work, which you'll see a better description of if you come over to the Twitch. But either way, you're welcome to hang out. We just finished the preface, and this book came out in 2018, but I'm reading it today because, on account of what's going on just worldwide, but also, of course, with the smoke and the wildfires all over the East Coast today, I figured everyone could use a little bit of a reminder of the fact that we definitely have tools and ideologies and different ways of being that are available to us. And I think we could all just use a reminder, something to keep on in the background, and just maybe bring a little bit more light into the day. So we're moving into part one. The first section is called Care Webs, Experiments in Creating Collective Access. Do you have the car today? Hey, Yade, I'm at the bus stop. I hurt so bad. Can you pick me up? Hey, can I borrow $20? Can you go buy groceries for me when you're out and drop them off? Here's a list. Do you want to go to the community acupuncture together? Hey B, hey B, needs more care shifters. Can you repost this Facebook note? Can we share the access van ride over to the city? If you come, you can say you're my personal care attendant and you won't have to pay. Do you have anemone tincture you could bring over? I'm flaring. Holding me would be good too. If I take your manual wheelchair and load it up with takeout, we'll all have food. Can you go with me to the clinic and take notes while I talk to my doctor? Can I use your address for the Easy Does It pickup? I'm just over the border into Oakland. Let's pass the hat so we can afford ASL for the event. Do you have the interpreter list? Here's the list of accessible event spaces we made on Google Docs. Can you be part of my Mad Map Crisis fam? Want to Skype if you can't get out, even if we live in the same city? Want to go with me to the food stamp office? Can you pick me up an eighth for me when you go to the dispensary? What does it mean to shift our ideas of access and care, whether it's disability, child care, economic access, or many more, from an individual chore, an unfortunate cost of having an unfortunate body, to a collective responsibility that's maybe even deeply joyful? Oh, good. I'm glad that you're here. Too many pennies. Thanks for hanging out. What does it mean for our movements, our communities, fam, ourselves, and our own lived experience of disability and chronic illness? What does it mean to wrestle with these ideas of softness and strength, vulnerability, pride, asking for help, and not, all of which are so deeply raced and classed and gendered? If collective access is revolutionary love without charity, how do we learn to love each other? How do we learn to do this love work of collective care that lifts us instead of abandons us, that grapples with all the deep ways in which care is complicated? This is an essay about care, about the ways sick and disabled people attempt to get the care and support we need on our own terms, with autonomy and dignity. It's specifically an essay about some experiments that have taken place over the past decade by sick and disabled, predominantly Black and brown queer people, to create networks of care by and for us. It's about our attempts to get what we need to love and live interdependently in the world and in our homes, without primarily relying on the state or often our biological families, the two sources disabled and sick people have most often been forced to rely on for care, sometimes, well, often, with abuse and lack of control. This is about some of the ways we're attempting to dream ways to access care deeply, in a way where we are in control, joyful, building community, loved, giving, and receiving, that doesn't burn anyone out or abuse or underpay anyone in the process. This is for us and by us, and it is also for everyone who thinks of themselves as able-bodied and normatively minded, who may not be, who will not always be, who the ghost of the need for care still dances with as deepest fate worse than death fear, as what you want the most but can't even let yourself speak. It is an essay full of sick and disabled QT BIPOC stories, that are well known in certain activist, disabled, QT BIPOC circles, but at risk of disappearing or not being passed down, as the mediums where we find each other become less accessible, safe, Facebook and the age of Trump, or fade away, Web 2.0. And I'm also thinking of care webs that have existed through time, that I know of through queer legend and myth, that do not often get counted as disabled stories, and may not have thought of themselves as disabled care stories, but still share access tools, meds, and care. Star House, the house started by Black and brown trans femme sex worker revolutionaries Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera, with rent paid by hustling and street sex work as a safe house for trans people of color and street trans people to be free, be with each other, and share hormones and other supplies for healing and gender affirmation. The AIDS activist prisoner networks in the 1980s and 90s that shared safer sex supplies and AIDS drugs and fought for prisoners to receive medical care. The MAD movement's underground safe houses and sharing of both pills and alternative treatments, as well as ways of coming off meds safely. The underground, often criminalized harm reduction networks, like the New England Drug Users Union today, where people share naloxone and fentanyl testing strips in their living rooms with folks who use opioids. We've found each other and offer healing and access to each other before and will again. It's an essay full of questions about what allows us to access care as sick and disabled people who have been taught that our care needs are a pain in the ass and a burden to the economy, the state, our families, the person we have to share the bus stop with, so we need to take up as small a space as possible. It is an essay rooted in the stories I know, live, and witness as a working class disabled femme of color, of all the ways our people have saved and continue to save each other against huge odds. It is an essay about the miracles that sick and disabled communities of color make for each other, and it's also about the contradictions and the cracks. Some of the questions are about what stops us from being able to ask for care when we come from Black and brown communities, for example, who have always been the ones forced to care for others for little or no money. Or about what happens when sick and disabled people are the only ones who do not forget about each other, but we all are extremely, extremely tired. I wrote this essay because I passionately believe in the power of our stories, of the revolution work we do when we cook a meal for each other, listen without judgment, share meds, hang out with each other during a psychotic break, or lift each other onto a toilet or a scooter. I wrote this essay because I passionately believe in recording sick and disabled QT BIPOC stories, and because I believe the stories I have witnessed and participated in over the past decade of building ways of creating care are both a core part of disability justice work and the work of making the next world, the world we want, the post-Trump, post-fascist, post-apocalyptic world. I wrote this because I believe we stand at the crossroads between both the gifts and the unexpected, inevitable collapses of our work, and we have the opportunity to dream and keep dreaming ways to build emergent, resilient care webs. I believe that our work in creating the new world depends on it, because all of us will become disabled and sick, because state systems are failing, yet community is not a magic unicorn, a one-stop shop that always helps us do the laundry and be held in need. I believe that the only way we will do this is by being fucking real, by not papering over the places where our rhetoric falls flat, where we ran out of steam, or where this shit is genuinely fucking hard. I forgot to turn my my sound down, but thanks for the follow, Hermes and Bo. I wrote this for my mother, a working class survivor of severe childhood sexual and physical abuse, a disabled Irish and Roma woman living with post-polio syndrome and no medical care, and then cancer spawned by environment. Wow, this is like literally the closest to home. That's literally me. And then cancer spawned by environmental racism, as well as DID and complex PTSD, who was rarely, if ever, able to access any form of care or support for her disabilities, who both neglected me medically and shielded me from institutionalization as a young, disabled, and neurodivergent person, who did the absolute best and most common thing she could do as a working class survivor who trusted no system and few people. I actually had no idea how much I have in common with this author until that exact sentence. So that's kind of blowing my mind right now. I wrote this for my younger self, a newly incredibly sick, isolated 22-year-old who made up ways to care for my disability in isolation from disability community, from books, prayers, guessing, and dreams. I wrote this for everyone who has been denied SSI, SSDI, ODSP, or whatever they call state disability money where you live, or official disability accommodations for the first or fourth time, who can't get that medical proof of our sickness or disability, and who thus can't get anything the state begrudgingly offers us, that discounted transit, access a ride, state or federal disability benefits, welfare, accommodations at school or work. This is for those of us who are closeting our disability to keep everything from health insurance and jobs to social acceptance and capital, all of which we need to survive. This is for those of us who cannot closet our disability, madness, deafness, and illness, whose witnessable disability is just a fact of life that becomes a bullet target for violence, for attempts by police, doctors, and families to unalive us and lock us up. This is for all of us evading that capture and control, that being disposed of, who still have need. This is for everyone black and brown who freeze, who feel we could never ever think about asking someone to do our dishes or clean our toilet or help us dress, because that is the work we or our families have done for little or no money during enslavement, colonial invasion, immigration, and racist poverty. And this is for those of us who have both cleaned toilets and wiped asses for little or no pay and respect, and who too need and deserve care with respect and dignity. This is for all of us, especially Black, Indigenous, and brown femme people who have kept our communities alive after being both abandoned and policed by the state and in the face of medical experimentation and denial of health insurance. This is for all the friends I know who have needed care but also needed to evade children's aid and foster care. This is for everyone who desperately needs care but will never let a care worker in their house for fear they or their children will be taken away by the state. This is for everyone who has had to run away from accepting care because care meant control by family members or partners or workers or strangers. This is for every group of stressed out QT BIPOC friends who are the only 3 disabled people you know, who are doing all the care for each other until it trails away into frustration, stress, yelling, and breakdowns. This is for those of us who have been forgotten and left behind by our communities, who have and have not survived that abandonment and isolation. This is for everyone trying to keep themselves or their friend out of the psych ward, who sometimes want more than anything for some actual professional who wouldn't be messed up and who would actually help. This is for all the times I've relaxed into the miracle of being cared for well, that changed my understanding of what was possible, and every time I've succeeded and failed at caring well. This is for the road we make by moving forward, the dream future of autonomous care we deserve. How people get care and don't, and what care means. That's an important distinction. All of those things. I'm not an academically trained disability scholar. I'm not going to pretend that this next section fits white-dominated disability studies academic standards. The history of disabled people accessing or being denied care and the ways our needs have been policed and profited off of is vast, and there is no way I can do it justice in one essay, but I wanted to offer a very brief history of how care has and has not been offered to us in North America pre- and post-colonialism. I'm also aware of how so much writing about disability is limited to a white-dominated disability studies field and language, and how inaccessible that is to the vast majority of sick and disabled people who could potentially use it, so there are pros and cons to both approaches. But here goes. There have been a million ways sick and disabled people have accessed the care we need over the centuries, and I don't have time to go over them. A light once over will say that in many pre-colonial contact communities, there existed ways of being disabled that did not mean stigma, shame, exile, or death. Disabled Cherokee scholar Cooley Driscoll has remarked that in pre-contact Cherokee, there are many words for people with different kinds of bodies, illnesses, and what would be seen as impairments. None of those words are negative or view those sick or disabled people as defective or not as good as normatively bodied people. With the arrival of white settler colonialism, things changed, and not in a good way. For many sick and disabled Black, Indigenous, and Brown people under transatlantic enslavement, colonial invasion, and forced labor, there was no such thing as state-funded care. Instead, if we were too sick or disabled to work, we were often unalived, sold, or left to die because we were not making factory or plantation owners money. Sick, disabled, mad, deaf, and neurodivergent people's care and treatment varied according to our race, class, gender, and location, but for the most part, at best, we were able to evade capture and find ways of caring for ourselves or being cared for by our families, nations, or communities, from our Black and Brown communities to disabled communities. At worst, a combination of legal and societal ableism plus racism and colonialism meant that we were locked up in institutions or hospitals for our own good. The ugly laws on the books in the United States from the mid 1700s to the 1970s stated that many disabled people were too ugly to be in public and legally prevented disabled people from being able to take up space in public. The ugly laws were interwoven with a mass creation in the 1800s and onward of hospitals, homes, sanatoriums, and charitable institutions, where it was the norm for disabled, sick, mad, and deaf people to be sequestered from able-bodied, normal society. These institutions overlapped with other prison carceral systems, like residential schools, where Indigenous children were stolen, abused, and stripped of their language and culture, and prisons where Black, brown, poor, criminalized, trans, queer, and sex working people were locked up for profit. People's fear of access and care didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of generations and centuries where needed care meant being locked up, losing your human and civil rights, and being subject to abuse. The specter of the home, locked up still haunts everyone when we consider asking for or needing care. One of the first and most passionate demands of the disability rights and mental patients liberation movements of the 1960s and 70s was for independent living and deinstitutionalization. It's an oft-told Crip story how the disability rights movement started with the Rolling Quads, the white polio-surviving physically disabled men who got radicalized while attending UC Berkeley by both witnessing Black and brown power and free speech movements and being sequestered in each other's company because they were only allowed to live in the campus infirmary. How after graduation, they started the first independent living centers and pushed for the Medicare and Medicaid to pay for state funding personal care attendants to allow them to live in their own apartments. God damn it, I hit a part in my Kindle and I don't know where I am now. Hold on, we'll find it. I don't know why Kindle does this. Like, it shouldn't be so hard to, like, or so easy to just skip over into like an entirely different, like I literally skipped to the end of the book. Jesus Christ. Okay, hold on. Ridiculous. There we go. Okay, I found it. Yet many of us live in the cliffhangers, as Patty Byrne puts it, of the disability rights movement, the spaces where a white-dominated, single-issue civil rights approach that depends on the ability to use lawsuits to achieve disability liberation leaves many of us behind. Some of us are disabled folks who are able to access care attendants to help us live that are paid for by the state, Department of Health, or social services. Some of us are disabled people whose disability the state never approves of, so it's not real. Some of us fear that letting anyone in to care for us will mean we are declared incompetent and lose our civil rights, so we guard the houses where we can be sick. Some of us know that accepting care means accepting queer phobia, transphobia, fat phobia, or sex phobia from our care attendants. Some of us are in the in-between of needing some care but not fitting into the state model of either total and permanent disability or fit and ready to work, so we can't access the services that are there. Many of us are familiar with being genuinely sick as hell and needing some help, but failing the official CRIP exams because we can still cook, shop, and work, only slowly and when there is no other choice. Some of us are not citizens. Some of us make $20 too much. Some of us will lose our right to marry if we go on state disability or our access to work or housing. Some of us belong to nations that will not accept state money. Some of us always, and especially post-Trump, with the rise of fascism calling for the end of Medicaid, the ACA, and the ADA in the US, and socialized medicine and human rights legislation throughout the world, are continuously worrying about what happens when our precarious right to state-funded care goes away, and what our survival strategies will be then. Mind you, again, this book was published in 2018, so this was something, just as Crutches and Spice is always talking about, that disabled right activists have been saying for a very long time about the rise of fascism. This isn't anything new. Because eugenics happens first. It's like the horse of fascism that it rides in on. Moving past nightmare towards strategies for the future of collective access. In the face of systems that want us dead, sick, and disabled, sick and disabled people have been finding ways to care for ourselves and each other for a long time. Also, what's up, Becca? We're reading Care Work. As Vancouver's Radical Access Mapping Project says, able-bodied people, if you don't know how to do access, ask disabled people. We've been doing it for a long time, usually on no money, and we're really good at it. Sometimes we call them care webs or collectives. Sometimes we call them my friend that helps me out sometimes. Sometimes we don't call them anything at all. Care webs are just life, just what you do. The care webs I write about here break from the model of paid attendant care as the only way to access disability support. Resisting the model of charity and gratitude, they are controlled by the needs and desires of the disabled people running them. Some of them rely on a mix of abled and disabled people to help. Some of them are experiments in CRIP-made access made by and for disabled people only, turning on its head the model that disabled people can only passively receive care, not give it or determine what kind of care we want. Whether they are disabled only or involve disabled and non-disabled folks, they still work from a model of solidarity, not charity, of showing up for each other in mutual aid and respect. I first learned of the term mutual aid as an anarchist teenager in books like Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed, and in a lot of zines that quoted white guy theorists like Kropotkin. All of these writers, and many other anarchist and anti-authoritarian writers, use the term to mean a voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources and services for mutual benefit. Mutual aid, as opposed to charity, does not connote moral superiority of the giver over the receiver. White people didn't invent the concept of mutual aid. Many pre-colonial and after Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities have complex webs of exchanges of care. However, given the presence of white anarchism as one of the biggest places that talk about ideas of mutual aid, it doesn't surprise me that one of the first examples of collective care I encountered was dreamed up by a white Southern disabled queer femme anarchist whose politics brought together disability and mutual aid. The prequel, Lori Erickson's Care Collective. Hello, lovely people. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lori Erickson, a queer femme gimp porn star academic who now lives in Toronto, Ontario, but grew up in Leesburg, Virginia, and lived in Richmond for 8 years. My work tends to focus on the intersections of radical queer disability and sexuality, bringing together personal experience, creativity through video and photography, and theory to explore issues of explicit sexual representation, embodiment, and desirability. As well, I theorize around personal assistance, care, relationships, and create alternative support structures. I also love sun, sparkly things, and social justice. I'm coming to DC to present at a long day seminar for and by young women with disabilities at American University. Then, of course, I have come to RVA and see my people, as well as eat biscuits and gravy at 821 Cafe. I arrive in DC Friday around 1-ish and a.m. and I'm around, sorry, I thought it's like AM, like as of the time. And I'm around until Monday morning. Then I am heading to Richmond till Wednesday Eve. I'm traveling with a friend who can help out with some of my care, but I am in need of friendly recruits to help as well. Plus, it's an awesome opportunity to meet fabulous and friendly people, see friends I have seen in too long. How you can help. I use a wheelchair and I'm looking to recruit folks to help with my personal care needs. Fancy words for getting into, out of bed, and going to the bathroom. No experience needed. I'm really good at talking folks through it, plus what I need help with is pretty straightforward. And you'll only have to be sort of buff. I weigh around 130 pounds, but it's not as bad as it seems. If you're worried about lifting, I might be able to buddy you up, or maybe you can buddy yourself up with a friend. 2 people makes it way easier, and yay for safety, smiley face. It doesn't take that long, around a 1 hour, usually less to pee, and a bit more to get into out of bed. I usually pee at 12-ish, 5-ish, and then when I get into bed and wake up. If you don't have a lot of time, even one shift would be extremely helpful. If you're interested, let me know, or if you know anyone else who might be interested, please send this their way. I appreciate people of all genders helping me. I need to know as soon as possible, so that I know how stressed out to be. Plus, we're coming so soon. Smiley face. Also, if you can send me your availability, that would be amazing. Help with any part of this would be awesome, and forwarding it to other nice people is also very much appreciated. Thanks so much. Can't wait to meet you and your friends, Lori. And then it looks like it transitions into an interview. So this is the interviewer. Your model of collective care includes disability as part of our social understanding of mutual care. What you're doing is helping to shift our collective social understanding of care. It's profoundly political. Lori Erickson nods her head. Yeah, it really is. It's too bad that taking care of each other has to be radical. Encountering Lori Erickson's artwork and then learning about and witnessing her care collective changed my life. Her artwork and disabled community organizing were some of the first places where I saw a femme-disabled person talk about disability, feminist, and desirability, or the conception of interdependence or collective care as a thing that could exist in the world. Her queer, femme, anarchist, disabled white Southern art, organizing, and self were everyday parts of my political reality in Toronto in the mid-2000s and had a huge impact on the city's activist communities. So it looks like, I guess it wasn't an interview. So Leah is speaking again. For many people in Toronto and beyond, her care collective has been both a groundbreaking model for alternative dreams of caremaking and a place to be brought into disability activism and culture. Lori began her care collective in her 20s in Virginia as a survival strategy. The state's refusal to fund attendant care adequately, as is true most of the time with state social service, meant that the amount of money she got to pay attendants was below minimum wage. And often, when she was able to hire an attendant with DHSS money, they were homophobic and unsupportive of Erickson when she was watching queer films or hanging out with other queer friends. In response, Erickson fired her attendants, had a meeting with her friends, and came up with a vision to experiment with collective friend-made care together. Her collective care continued when she moved to Toronto, partially because of her lack of ability to access state-funded home care attendants because of her not being a permanent resident. For the past 15 years, her care collective has been filled with disabled and non-disabled friends and community members who work shifts each week to help her with dressing, bathing, and transferring. She doesn't have to do all the care work herself. She has friends who take on the admin work of emailing, scheduling, and training potential care shifters. When she travels away from her home base of Toronto to conferences, to lecture and teach workshops, or to visit friends and lovers, she or supporters ask via Facebook and email for people in that region to help and be part of her care team. In recent years, Lori and allies have planned small fundraisers to purchase adaptive equipment and compensate some care shifters who are poor, low income for their time in care work, especially as Lori gets older and her community gets more disabled themselves. Lori's Care Collective is not just a practical survival strategy to get her the care she needs. It's a site of community and political organizing, where many people learn about disability politics, both the theory and the nitty-gritty, in action for the first time. In one interview, she notes that upon moving to Toronto, her Care Collective became a more explicitly political space. It was more like mobilizing a community. I was meeting new people, I was connecting with folks, and I started to see the ways that collective care functions as an anti-ableism training for folks, she said. People were becoming radicalized around care and disability through participating in the collective. It's not like I'm giving workshops or lectures from the bathroom, but we're talking about both of our lives, and so that's part of the way that the education happens. In Lori's Care Collective, her need for access is posited as something she both needs and deserves, and as a chance to build community, hang out with Lori, and have fun, not as a chore. This is drastically different from most ways care is thought of in the world, as an isolated, begrudgingly done task that is never a site of pleasure, joy, or community building. This is radical. It is a radical rewriting of what care means, of what disability means, taking anarchist ideas of mutual aid and crip femming them out. I've shown people Lori's fundraising video for the collective, where shots of her transferring to the toilet with help of a care shifter are interspersed with footage of her and care shifters trading gossip and dating advice over breakfast. After seeing the video, one participant in a workshop on care I gave said, "It's really mind-blowing for me to see someone addressing care that's very intimate without shame, and with everyone laughing and having a good time." Lori's Care Collective model is a deep possibility model, not a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone who needs care. Her collective working relies on her having access to a broad network of friends and acquaintances, a social and activist life where people know her and are interested in helping her out, something many people, especially sick, disabled, and mad people, are too socially isolated to be able to access. Although I admire her collective and have learned a lot from watching it, I also think about how there aren't a million collectives for low-income, black and brown, autistic, physically disabled, or chronically ill people in Toronto. I think of the challenges myself and black and brown friends and acquaintances have had finding people who are willing and able to do care for a week or a month, let alone years, especially when that care involves pain or mental health crises that may not have a resolution. I think about the ways Lori's willingness to offer emotional caregiving to her care shifters, her whiteness and extroversion and neurotypicality are factors that aid her in being able to access an abundance of care, factors not available to everyone. I also think about the people I know who want and need the distance of having someone they don't know care for them. As a wheelchair-using, physically disabled black femme friend of mine remarked to me, "I'm glad Lori's model works for her, but if someone drops me, if someone doesn't show up for a shift, I can die. I don't ever want to depend on being liked or loved by the community for the right to shit in my toilet when I want to." I think that all of these things can be true at the same time. Lori's collective is still an incredibly important example of a CRIP-created way of accessing care that has made more worlds of care possible for myself and others to dream. Creating Collective Access Detroit, June 2010 to June 2012. We know that for many of us, access is on our minds when it comes to traveling, navigating the city, movement spaces, buildings, sidewalks, public transportation, rides, the air, the bathrooms, the places to stay, the pace, the language, the cost, the crowds, the doors, the people who will be there, and so much more. Would you like to be connected to a network of CRIPs and our allies, comrades who are working together to create collective access? What is collective access? Collective access is access that we intentionally create collectively instead of individually. Most of the time, access is placed on the individual who needs it. It's up to you to figure out your own access, or sometimes up to you and your caregiver, personal attendant, PA, or random friend. Access is rarely weaved into a collective commitment and way of being. It is isolated and relegated to an afterthought, much like disabled people. Access is complex. It is more than just having a ramp or getting disabled folks Crips into a meeting. Access is a constant process that doesn't stop. It is hard, and even when you have help, it can be impossible to figure out alone. We're working to create mutual aid between Crips and beyond. We hope that together we can create a culture of collective access. We're just trying this out. Would you like to join us in practicing what this could look like? Do you have ideas? Are you an ally comrade who wants to help out or be on call? Creating Collective Access, CCA, was a Crip Femme of Color made piece of brilliance that came together in the summer of 2010. You can read much more about it at creatingcollectiveaccess.wordpress.com. But in my version of the story, CCA happened because 3 disabled queer Asian femmes were on a conference call to plan the workshops we were organizing at the 2010 Allied Media Conference, AMC, and U.S. Social Forum, USSF, an enormous social justice gathering bringing tens of thousands of people to Detroit to imagine a revolutionary future, and we were completely fucking stressed out about how we were going to survive those conferences. This is a very common disability experience, getting ready to go travel to a conference and having your freak out about how badly the whole thing will fuck up your body. Will the airport break your wheelchair? Will you get sick from a fragrance exposure? Will the accessible van or ASL promised in the conference material just not be there? Where will the food be, and is it stuff you can eat? Will you be 1,000% overstimulated by thousands of people talking about intense things? What if you have a panic attack or unaliving ideation 2,000 miles away from home and your usual supporters access hacks? In short, how will you negotiate the world away from the Crip survival skills you have where you live? We're used to feeling that our disability experiences are private, embarrassing, and not to be spoken about, especially Crips who may be working mostly in non-disabled social justice communities, and conference and travel bring those feelings on even more so. But in 2010, some of us came together at a nascent moment of disability justice organizing. We came together as disabled, queer, and trans people of color, talking, sometimes haltingly, about our intersectional lives and talking about what disability organizing would mean that didn't leave any part of ourselves behind. We were rooted in a ground of other disabled, queer, and trans people of color who were finding each other through online portals like the Ozala Story, a closed online portal for disabled, queer, and trans people of color, through the cultural, political work of Sins Invalid and the Disability Justice Collective, through our own blogs and chance meetings in Crip of Color hallways, coming and going. And on that call, Stacy, Mia, and I had a profound moment of clarity. We didn't have to choose between handling our access needs on our own or crossing our fingers that the conference and the airlines would come through to take care of us. We could experiment in coming together and caring for each other. What would it be like to create a space that centered Black and brown disabled people, that was led by disabled queer femmes of color, where instead of able-bodied people begrudgingly helping us, we were doing it for ourselves? We didn't know, but we knew it would be the polar opposite of so much existing disabled spaces that were dominated by white Crips and their casual and overt racism, so much mainstream space where we were always on hold with access services. We didn't know what we were doing, and we knew what we were doing. We knew we were creating something revolutionary. So we did it, and we did it quick. In the last 3 weeks before we had to go to Detroit, threw up a quick WordPress site asking for other sick and disabled queer, mostly Black and brown people to find us, for us to find each other. We knew we couldn't create access for thousands of people, but we wanted to see what we could do with the resources we had. And it worked. Sick and disabled queer people of color found us through email and Facebook posts and friends of friends, and once we got there, through running into us on site. It came together in that effortless feeling way that happens sometimes when something's time has come. There was so much creativity, hustle, and fun, and disabled queer of color brilliance. One member of CCA drove up from North Carolina to Detroit with 2 other disabled POC and her personal care attendant in her wheelchair-accessible van.
That van legally fits 4 people, but I have photos of 13 Crips crammed into it and driving through Detroit laughing our asses off. I know, I was like picturing like that. We shared information about why fragrance-free body care products are important and shared the actual products, especially those for black and brown hair and skin, with each other, including with people who'd never heard of fragrance-free before. But we're down if it meant we were able to be together. We booked a few accessible dorm suites so we could sleep and hang out with each other. CCA was one of the first places I ran into what I would later call cross disabilities solidarity, and more than that, the reality of our different disabilities not being a liability, that there could be ways we supported each other. One person selectively used some poor, cute cripple skills to charm the dorm staff and get them to unlock the fourth floor kitchen so we could cook and store groceries. One neurodivergent person who didn't have mobility problems walked a mile to the closest restaurant to load up someone else's spare manual wheelchair with our shawarma orders and walk the food back to everyone who couldn't walk that far. Being less isolated helped us make group demands of the AMC that were effective because they came from collective disabled power, not just one individual crip writing a request on a registration form. The AMC ordered in fragrance-free soap for the washrooms because Detroit back then didn't have any supermarkets, let alone one that stocked Dr. Bronner's unscented. The relationships and collective power we built also helped us to survive the USSF, which had some major access challenges, like no wheelchair accessible shuttle, even though it was on all the promo material. And when we called to ask where it was, the person we talked to was like, "Can you come to the conference site and ask about the shuttle?" And didn't quite get it when we were like, "No, we can't, because we can't physically get there." I remember someone texting, "I'm spooning out, I need Crip Love," from where they were passed out at one end of the conference center, and all of us getting there as fast as we could, and them saying that just watching us walk and roll up made all the difference. We didn't just survive the conference, we made powerful community. Committed to leaving no one behind, we rolled through the conference in a big, slow group of wheelchair users, cane users, and slow-moving people. Instead of the classic able-bodied conference experience most of us were used to, where able-bodied people walked at their able-bodied rate and didn't notice we were 2 blocks behind, or nowhere, we walked as slow as the slowest person and refused to abandon each other. People got out of the way. Instead of going out to inaccessible party sites, we chose to stay in and ate and shared about our disabled lives. For some of us, it was our first time doing that. People cried, flirted, and fell in love. Oh, I gotta plug in my TikTok. Also, thanks to everyone that's hanging out. I hope you're enjoying this book as much as I am. For anyone that's just come in, we're reading, as the title on Twitch suggests, the book Care Work. Oh dear. I decided that because of what's going on in the world, I mean, just as has been forever, everyone could use a bit of liberatory reality and perhaps optimism. CCA changed everyone who was present for it, and a lot of people who just heard about it. It was just 4 days, but people went home to their communities transformed. We were no longer willing to accept isolation or a tiny bit of access, or being surrounded by white disabled folks as the only kind of disability community we could access, or being forgotten. We talked about how it had been for us to be with each other. We threw queer disabled femme of color brunches that were maybe just us and the 3 other sick and disabled femmes of color we knew, but we sat in bed and talked and talked and talked about our lives. We tried out starting Crip hangouts and zines and performance nights. We started thinking about what it would mean to have our own care collectives on a permanent basis. We came back less willing to accept ableism from conferences and community spaces because we knew it could be different. And if CCA could happen in some place with scarce physical resources like Detroit, it could happen anywhere. Being part of that wild pack of slowness, talking tentatively about our disabled lives in ways we'd never said out loud before, changed everyone's lives. An aside, story 3, the crash and burn emergency model. In many able-bodied activist communities, QT BIPOC and mostly white punk I've been a part of, I've been witness to another form of care web that is very different from the ones I've written about so far. They're the emergency response care webs that happen when someone able-bodied becomes temporarily or permanently disabled, and their able-bodied network of friends springs into action. When the friend gets hit by a car when they're on their bike or gets pneumonia, there are emails and calls and care calendars set up, and mostly able-bodied people show up to the hospital. Mostly able-bodied people cook food and throw benefits. There's a sense of urgency, purpose, action. Oh my God, someone is sick. We must come together as a community to help them. Many disabled people roll their eyes at this moment. Wow, when it's your mountain climbing friend who gets hit riding their bike, you care, huh? For me and other folks who are always disabled, not so much, huh? The urgent care calendar, the urgent care calendar care web, there we go, okay, yeah, lasts for a few weeks, a month, and then people trickle off. People think that the person's all better. It isn't a fun cause of the moment anymore. People think, wow, you're still disabled? These models have a lot to learn from disability justice models of centering sustainability, slowness, and building for the long haul. They tend to come from people who don't know well that disabled people or community or activism exists. Since they don't know or have been firmly ignoring that we exist, they often reinvent the wheelchair. I love that. I'm not the only Crip who's felt better or felt bitter, bitter, very different. When I've seen calls for benefits and care earnestly sent out for someone who's been able-bodied up to that point and now has an acute sudden need, when I've watched myself and my friends who have chronic disabilities, have been disabled since birth, or live with chronic physical illness, or dance with madness mental health, struggle to get responses to our everyday and acute asks for care and support. These emergency response care webs often really fall apart when and if the person they're for becomes disabled in a long-term way, and the members realize that the issue isn't an individual problem that their buddy has, that beyond needing care, their friend is being impacted by the ableism of both the everyday world and much queer and activist space. Clubs they used to hang with aren't wheelchair accessible, they notice for the first time. Fighting with insurance companies in the access van take hours. Huh? This is the thing? The emails start coming in to the one Crip they know. Hey, do you know where so-and-so can find accessible housing? Seems like it's kind of hard to find. It's not that I don't want folks to access what they need, but I also have to roll my eyes that these folks are noticing ableism for the first time. I want them to understand that the struggles their friend is facing are not new or unique to them, that although I'll usually share my knowledge, so many of us have been using limited spoons to fight these fights for a long time. If these care webs are going to keep working, a paradigm shift needs to occur in those friends' heads. They need to see the disabled people they've blanked out on listening to for years when we've been trying to talk about access or our lives. An apology might be cool too. They need to understand that their friend isn't a special cripple, cooler than the rest, that the problems they're facing aren't individual ones, but systemic struggles that face all Crips and need collective solutions. They need to ask themselves why they have systematically refused to value or take in what disabled folks around them have been and are saying. They need to listen and learn from the care work and skills disability communities have been doing for years, and maybe offer some compensation for that knowledge, or at least say thank you. Story 4, CCA Bay Area. In the fall of 2010, some of us who'd been in Detroit came back to the Bay Area where we lived or moved there for the first time, and it occurred to us, why didn't we try and do something similar here? What would it mean to take the temporary experiment and Crip of Color made access that had worked so beautifully during the 4 to 10 days we'd be in Detroit to our home places in a long-term way? We dove right into the modest, wildly ambitious plan of attempting to create a Bay Area collective, or care collective, by and for disabled, queer, and trans people of color. We came together with a lot of hope and a ton of longing, a longing for a community we had been wanting for most of our lives. We came together with so much need and so much fear, like icebergs where most of the mass lies below the surface. When we sat down at our very first meeting, I thought I knew exactly how it was going to go. When I thought about what I might need in terms of disability care and support, I could name it right away. I could sure use some help driving my best friend to acupuncture and the grocery store and the mosque twice a week. I loved helping them, but between supporting them, supporting myself, and working 2 or 3 jobs, plus working on 2 or 3 unpaid collectives that were each like part-time jobs, I was exhausted. And in a smaller tone of voice that didn't reach outside my head, I could use folks who could help me do some stuff too. This project turned out to be a little more complicated than I thought it would. Everyone had a lot of questions. Should CCA Bay be open to white folks or just people of color? Should Crips or non-disabled QT BIPOC allies? Wait, just Crips or non-disabled QT BIPOC allies? Some argued that some of us had white Crips in our pods of people we shared care with already, so it wouldn't make sense to exclude them. Other folks felt strongly that white disabled people always dominated Crip space and did not want to risk creating a space where we would have to fight to continue to center people of color. Some felt that including non-disabled BIPOC folks could help develop seed organizers who could work to make the non-disabled QT BIPOC community less ableist. But before we jumped into Google Calendar, one member pulled out a flip chart. She said that before we did anything, we needed to talk what would allow us to give and receive care. Most of us, she pointed out, had received shitty care, abusive care, care with strings attached. Most of us, she guessed, would want to give care and then shrug and say, I don't know, I'm fine, when asked what we needed. We went around, what made it possible for us to receive care? What was bound up with that act of reception? Under what conditions could we be vulnerable? These, it turned out, were very deep and necessary questions, hard to answer ones. The Crip $64,000 questions. That friend was right. All of us were eager to offer care, receiving care, not so much. It was so much easier to offer care to other people than to ask for what we needed for so many reasons. Many of us had been raised as immigrants and or women or femmes of color to always jump up and feed people first, do the dishes, and help without being asked, while serving ourselves last. For many of us, care had been something that was forced on us, something abusive family members or teachers or healthcare workers did, whether we liked it or not. Or care had been something it wasn't safe to say that we needed, because there was no care out there for us. No health care, no therapist, no parent with time, no safe parent who actually cared. Maybe as disabled people, if we wanted to have any kind of independence, we had to deny that we needed any help at all in order to stay in mainstream classes, go to college, or date. We had to say that we didn't have any needs. I can remember my mother clearly telling me in high school, when I first thought I might be neurodivergent. It was decades before I would know that word, but I was still really fucking clear that my brain and cognition and my ability to navigate space were very different from most people around me. That it was unsafe for me to say that I might need a tutor. Tutors and accommodations, newly allowed under the brand new ADA, were for the rich white boys. I just had to be twice as smart and keep up if I wanted to get a scholarship. I couldn't afford to look stupid. And finally, some of our needs were so vulnerable, so embarrassing, so complicated to ask for that it was much easier to just not admit we needed them. In that go-around, when I silently thought I could use some help too, one of the first things I thought of was that when I was sick, I often needed help with housework, making my bed and doing dishes, chores and laundry, buying groceries and cooking food. But as a working class femme raised by an ex-waitress mom who taught me to always bust my own table, and as someone who'd cleaned houses for a living, I had a strong working class ethic about always doing my own housework. I couldn't imagine asking one of my friends to clean my toilet or do my dishes without feeling like an asshole, even though I was regularly and happily did chores for friends when they were sick. We met an average of twice a week for a year. A lot of our time was spent building relationships, hanging out, and supporting each other in different ways, from physical care to emotional care during breakups. And we'd face some challenges that many groups like ours had faced and will face again. We realized that even though we were all queer and trans disabled people of color, we didn't automatically know each other's access needs cross disability. People who were physically disabled didn't automatically understand the needs of folks who were mad and vice versa. Sometimes we thought of those misunderstandings as betrayals instead of opportunities to own our mistakes or ask each other to teach us. Mia Mingus's often quoted words from her essay of the same name about committing to Crip community, "Wherever you are is where I want to be," got put to the test when access needs weren't complementary and we couldn't physically be in the same space. When someone needed help moving out of their house up 2 flights of stairs, even though the call for help said, "Come if you can help move and lift boxes, come by if you just want to lend moral support, bring food to share," suggesting that helping physically move boxes, bringing food, and offering moral support were all equally legit ways of supporting. But if I was too fatigued to get out of bed and too broke to bring food, did that mean that I wasn't being a good community member? We were running into a similar challenge Lori had once talked about with an earlier care web she'd been involved in. What happens when chronically ill folks, who often have fatigue, lack of physical strength, and a need to shift and cancel schedules as we get sick, try to assist physically disabled folks who often need folks to be able to lift heavy things and who may have pretty scheduled lives, e.g., chair users who have PCA care shifts when they pee scheduled every 4 to 6 hours? We weren't always great at sitting with those contradictions with kindness and curiosity. And okay, that didn't work. What would? Often instead, we experienced the places where interdependence didn't just magically work out as betrayal, letting each other down. We had so many hopes for each other, so much belief that we could be everything to each other, effortlessly and automatically, through shared identity. And we'd been betrayed so many times before by white disabled people and non-disabled people in our lives. So we hoped that since we'd finally found that beloved BIPOC, sick, and disabled community, we'd never fuck up or be tired, always know the right thing to do and be able to do it. It turned out that like every time I've come together with people I've shared an identity with, there was bliss and also heartbreak when we assumed that that bliss would be easy and forever. As Ram Ham of Ramp Vancouver writes, if interdependency is in our DNA, what does it mean when we fall out of whack with it? How do we handle the realities of our bodies and minds that need what they need when they need it? What does it mean when I can't support you in the ways you're supporting me? Does interdependency mean we do the same for one another at all times, as though there's even such a thing as the same when it comes to this stuff? Is it a gentle ebb and flow? What if my ebb will never match your flow? What if it's sometimes a torrential downpour and one of us is drowning? What do we do then? There were more questions, like what happened when some of us could hang together more because we had fewer mobility needs, we could make it into a car, could deal with exposures, and some of us couldn't. How do we make things feel fair when some of us got tired and sick and needed to cancel, and others, maybe folks who practiced sucking it up and working through pain more, maybe just folks who didn't have pain and fatigue, were left feeling like they were doing all the work? What about those of us who felt more comfortable going to non-disabled events together, so got to spend that time and get that visibility, and those of us who felt more overwhelmed or had more anxiety about being stared at? And maybe the biggest disabled community question of all, what happens when a lot of people who have always been the only one are no longer the only disabled queer of color in the room? How does that affect how we work together, build community, and work out conflict? Sometimes because we were used to being the only revolutionary Crip fighting ableism in a sea of able-bodied obliviousness, it was hard for us to hear that we weren't always right, to understand differences of opinion, or approach or experience as other than wrong, or attack or threat. After a year, our group broke up from all these pressures and hard spots and a web of interpersonal conflict. It was a hard breakup. I felt like my dream sick and disabled QT BIPOC crew had fallen apart, that a community I had passionately believed in and given much of my limited energy to had failed. I didn't know that one group falling apart didn't have to mean that it was it for the idea of building a care web for that movement. I wish we could have known that the struggles we hit weren't failures or signs of how inadequate we were, but incredibly valuable learnings. I wish I'd known that what I do now, that all this stuff is the $6 million crip question, that we were by far not the only disabled queers to struggle with them, and that our struggle to figure these questions out is at the heart of our movement work. CCA is another worthy, imperfect model in my body's archive, one I build on as I build care in my life now. Story 5, an ongoing virtual care web, sick and disabled queers. Disabled Mizrahi genderqueer writer and organizer Billy Rain started Sick and Disabled Queers, SDQ, a Facebook group for well, sick, and disabled queers in 2010. Billy started SDQ as an experiment in building an online community open to all sick and disabled queer people that would center sick and disabled queer people of color and other folks who had traditionally been marginalized from mainstream disability rights spaces, that would also be accessible to the many sick and disabled queers who were isolated, homebound, or had limited energy or ability to travel physically to an in-person meeting. Mostly, Billy wanted a place where a lot of sick and disabled queer people could hang out in bed, online, and chat with each other. Over the 8 years of its existence, SDQ blew up into a virtual North America-wide community that both offered a hell of a lot of practical care and support, shared knowledge about diseases and doctors and disability hearings, people witnessing each other, and fundraising for rent and medical bills and accessible vans, and become a locus of disability justice thinking, relationship building, and organizing. It is impossible for me to separate the care work SDQ members did from the theories we made, from how we shared tools, wrote poetry, and created friendships. SDQ folks regularly mailed each other meds and extra inhalers and adaptive equipment. We shared, when asked, information about what treatments worked for us and what didn't, and tips for winning a disability hearing. We crowdsourced money for folks who needed to replace stolen wheelchairs, detox their houses, get living expenses together for rehab, or get out of unsafe housing situations. People sent care packages and organized visit teams for members they might never have met in person who were in the hospital, rehab, or the psych ward. We co-created an evolving, amazing cross-disability best practices community guidelines document that helps folks learn about the disabilities that aren't ours, from captioning videos to neurodivergent communication styles. At its height, it was everything good that social media made possible. Instant connection with 1 million people with shared identities and interests, who could listen to you when you were in crisis or answer a disability question that no one near you knew the answer to. It was a structure that broke 2 of the biggest barriers most disabled people face: isolation and shame. SDQ felt like a hotspot of disability justice and practice. Some of the smartest DJ thought happened here, and mostly it felt free of activist stardom, but filled with collective disabled intelligence. Instead of a few special crypts, it felt like a place where a lot of folks, often especially folks who were deeply isolated and excluded from systemic power and the world, got to think and talk with each other, take and share pictures of ourselves in bed, share tips about hypermobility and sex, diagnose each other way faster than the free clinic could, and also ask big questions about disability art, sex, activism, and life. SDQ, at its best, functioned as a big, sustainable, pretty damn cross-accessible care web, powered by members who were homebound, not working a lot, isolated, on disability, and who had time to throw down support, prayers, and connection via text, the internet, or phone. Because the format was text-based, it was deaf accessible and accessible to folks for whom voice and in-person communication is hard. It was and is a more challenging, less accessible format for folks who are working, anxious, or overwhelmed by a lot of internet or EMF sensitive, so that being on the computer is hard or impossible. SDQ had a community value of people responding how they can, as they can, with no shame if they didn't have capacity. SDQ is also a model of what we mean when we try to explain that disabled people know how to do sustainability. SDQ is inherently very sustainable because it wasn't just you trying to ask your crew of 6 local people for help. You could reach out to thousands of people across the world, and someone would always be up. Someone would always have cash or capacity or energy to talk you through whatever it was. SDQ grew from a community with 1 moderator to one with 6, so there was always someone to step in if someone else was sick or spooned out. SDQ felt like a living example of what sustainable organizing looks like, led by people who are pushed out of 99% of able-bodied mainstream activism, and are told that we aren't capable of doing any kind of organizing or political activity. I remember a heated debate on SDQ where a new member said they liked the space, but it didn't seem like there was much activism going on there, or going on here. People got really heated. We talked passionately about how what we were doing on SDQ, the talking and the med sharing and the scheming and the life support, absolutely counted as activism, was a way we were transforming traditional notions of what activism was to make it over in our own crypted out images. And that without the life support we were giving each other, we wouldn't be able to stay alive to do activism or life at all. Care futures. As I write this, Trump is in his 2nd year. We've withstood his government's attempts to destroy the ADA, the Affordable Care Act's access to health care for disabled and sick people, and Medicaid's funding of paid home attendant care. Everyone I know is a mix of on edge, permanently wondering what shit will hit the fan next, trying not to be stuck in reactivity and panic, and sometimes absurdly hopeful and passionate about building the futures we need. I am 10 years into these wild experiments with collective access and care, and I am both grateful for the stories under my belt and full of the knowledge of how much I still don't know. I continue to live a life supported by a practice of being able to call on kin in emergencies and everyday need and being able to respond to need. I am a veteran of many emergency care circles and GoFundMes, and I have come together when someone is facing a disability crisis, eviction, medical bills, emergencies, mental health crises. I know some things about how to organize a circle of people who can offer care, stop by with food, send money, and text people back. Yet as I move forward in this life of creating and receiving care, I am continually impressed by how we find ways to keep each other alive when the state is fucked and community can be fucked and inadequate too. I love seeing how friends and strangers seem to be more and more used to crowdfunding care and setting up CareShift Google Docs. I also see the burnout and exploitation of often femme and disabled labor that happens, and also what happens when people plain run out of energy, money, and time. I think about the needs I have that I am still too ashamed to let anyone see, let alone take care of. I also think about friends and strangers who have plenty of needs but not enough friends or strangers willing and able to come through to care for them. The community is not a magic utopia, just like our families weren't, and we don't all just magically love each other, or even like each other, let alone agree on every political issue. I think about people I know who are mean or angry or bitter or hard to like and disabled, and how that confluence is not a surprise or an accident, but because many of us are indeed in a shitty mood, mean or bitter from withstanding decades of ableism and the isolation that it brings. I think about the people I know who I don't want to die lying in their own piss, but I don't want to be the one who changes their diaper either. I think about the things I still can't ask friends to help me with, cleaning the house when it's incredibly nasty, after I've been in pain for weeks, dealing with shit or blood. I think about my friend's statement that she shouldn't have to rely on being liked or loved to get care. I recently realized I was hitting caregiving burnout, something I was familiar with as a concept but never thought would happen to me with a loved one after many months of chronic illness and mental health crisis on both our parts. After a Google search connected me with a caregiver's website from my county and I sent an email, I got a nice phone call back from someone from who told me that we would be eligible for 24 hours of emergency respite care. Someone would be paid by the county to show up, pick up the meds, do the dishes, cook some food, and listen. She tactfully said, "Many people find they have an easier time with someone who is being paid well to do the work, coming in and helping them asking a friend to clean, or helping, then asking a friend to clean and cook." When I told my friend that this existed, not only did they agree, they explained, "How come all our friends aren't using this instead of just burning each other out?" I know the answers. Shame, lack of access to the web, thinking that it doesn't exist, or the actuality that it really doesn't exist, or we won't be eligible, or we'll have to jump through rings of fire to get it. And it made me see more possibilities. I don't think there's any one single answer to the need for care. I just want to echo my friend Dory, more care, more of the time. I want us to dream mutual aid in our post-apocalyptic revolutionary societies, where everyone gets to access many kinds of care, from friends and internet strangers, from disabled community centers, and from some kind of non-fucked up, non-state state that would pay caregivers well and give them health benefits and time off, and enshrine sick and disabled autonomy and choice. I want us to keep dreaming and experimenting with all these big, ambitious ways we dream care for each other into being. Some tools and pitfalls to watch out for folks dreaming care webs. Crips supporting Crips, only ever. Crip on Crip support is awesome. Often, after a lifetime of ableist, able-bodied people providing shitty or abusive care, and assuming that we're not able to do anything ourselves, disabled people caring for each other can be a place of deep healing. Many, if not most of us, have good reasons not to trust that able-bodied people will eventually get it, will actually come through on their promises of care or support. Lots of disabled folks I know who are well versed in this experience also understand that it's mostly only other sick and disabled folks who actually show up for each other. We can be projectile vomiting and we'll still send you a supportive text from the side of the toilet. However, moving together as disabled people, in my mind, has some important caveats. Solidarity with other Crips also means the realities of an inaccessible world and crossability access. If I'm chronically ill and don't have the energy strength to lift you onto the toilet, that doesn't mean I'm a bad ally. There's also the reality that sometimes we all need care simultaneously. I've often seen Crip-only spaces filled with feelings of betrayal and hopelessness when we cannot fulfill some of our friends' needs. Instead, I believe it's possible to build a model of experimenting and seeing how it works out, then adjusting. We can try, knowing we may fail and things may turn out to be more complicated than we expected. I also think that recruiting non-disabled folks who actually have their shit together or can be trained to can be a great option for some care. And what about paying some folks in cash or work skill trade, some of the time for spoons or energy-demanding labor? How about valuing a system of people contributing as they can, not necessarily equally or always? Assuming that as Crips we intrinsically understand each other's access needs, or that access intimacy, even when we have the same kind of disability, is automatic. Or that even if we really get each other's shit at first, our needs don't change over time. Not paying attention to the gendered, raced, class dynamics of care, aka are the poor and working class disabled femmes doing all the work all the time. Care is feminized and invisibilized labor. Care is something that many, not all, poor working class folks do like breathing. We got time. It's just the right thing to do, right? What's going on with race and entitlement? Who feels comfy asking? Are the white queers, the pretty queers, the middle class, relatively happy, skinny, normal queers getting much care? How many masculine gendered people have I cared the ass off for with no reciprocity? Talk about this stuff. It's really important. Disrupt it. Get the mask, pretty, abled people to put in time. Doing all the admin work yourself. So often I've seen sick and disabled folks do everything, all the caregiving, all the resource buying, and all the emailing and filing. Get some eager, able-bodied person to manage the damn calendar. Assuming there is one right way to do it, it being the ways we offer or organize care, and that a way that works for a while won't change. The circle of 6 people who come together at first may not be able to keep doing everything forever. The one person who is so great at doing the admin organization end of things may get really sick of doing it, especially if they're holding all the notes in their head. Build capacity. Share the tools someplace everyone can access them. Switch out roles. Plan for people giving care to have our own crises. Having only one person with the skills and capacity to coordinate stuff is a recipe for burnout. Assuming the care webs have to be huge or that someone else somewhere is the expert. We're so used to disabled care being professionalized, to assuming that medical and therapeutic professionals are the only ones qualified to intersect with our terrifying bodies. But the first CCA was created on 3 weeks' notice. Collective care, like transformative justice, can be so many things. A Crip Your Hangout, an ASL meetup, a Lots of Helping Hands calendar, a hangout where I bring you food and we smoke high CBD weed. Sometimes it's not perfect. Often disabled folks are isolated. Some people have a big community to draw on. Many of us don't. But just like some access is better than none, some good care can be better than none and can be built on. Questions to ask yourself as you start a care web or collective and keep asking. What is the goal of your care web? Who needs care? What kind? Who's in it? What are their roles? Caregiver, care receiver, both, admin person, fundraiser. How are you resisting the charity model in your work? What are your best practices that allow the people receiving care to receive care well? What are best practices that allow the people offering care to offer care well? What physical tools, a van, scent-free cleanser, a car, a smartphone, do you need to make the access work? What money or other resources do you need to make it happen? How will you celebrate and make it fun? How will you build in time off and times when people are sick and you need a plan B? What meeting structure do you need to check in, talk through issues, and keep things on track? Are you building in ways for disabled folks to offer care instead of assuming that only able-bodied people are the carers? What's your plan for dealing with conflict when it happens? How are you going to document your work? Do you need a place to keep receipts, a log of who does what hours? Do you have a plan for checking in and making sure funky dynamics aren't creeping into your care? This could be anything from pity, martyrdom, guilt, or difficulty negotiating boundaries to the ways gender dynamics, women or femme people doing more care than masculine people and receiving less, expectations that many genders of people are supposed to have it all together. Race dynamics, universalization of white experience, racism creeping in when black or brown people are doing cleaning or physical care for white folks, class dynamics, whorephobia, internalized ableism, or cross-disability dynamics, for example, the differences between the experiences of more visibility apparently disabled folks and those whose disabilities are invisibilized. These are just some examples, not an exhaustive list. It helps to view these issues coming up as part of the work and to have a proactive scheduled time to check in about them. That was the end of that essay. I think I'm going to take, we're going to do an intermission. So from what I saw, it should take about 4 to 5 hours to read the whole book. So I think we're probably about like halfway there. And I assume that, it makes sense that we take a little break to eat because it wouldn't make much sense if we read a book about care work and didn't care for ourselves at the same time. So I'm gonna take that intermission. I think I'm gonna stop the stream. I considered just like kind of leaving it on with the music, but I think it makes more sense to just kind of save it as two parts. For anyone that's unaware, I started a Twitch a week ago, and I all the readings that I do are saved on Twitch. I don't have affiliate yet, so they're only saved on my Twitch for about a week. But whenever they're in danger of expiring, I'm just putting it onto YouTube. So it's exported onto a folder on my YouTube so that folks can listen at their leisure whenever they'd like. And it's in a folder called Dr. Bird on Twitch. So that's definitely there. So anyway, hydrate, get some food, take care of yourselves, maybe get some sun if there is some. Obviously, doing what you can to make sure that you're breathing air that is safe for you, especially for those of us on the East Coast. There's too much going on in the world for us not to remember to care for ourselves. And that's what I'm hoping this book will be able to remind us in a time that is so full of crises as all years, if not entire lifetimes, have been full of. So do what we can. Maybe have a little mini care sesh among those around you if possible. Check in, see what your needs are. I'm a big fan of, there's a creator that I often, when I'm scrolling after I wake up, who will be like, all right, this is a check-in, like take a deep breath. Do you need water? Do you have your glasses, hearing aids, mobility aids, like that kind of thing? I don't know if y'all have seen that creator, but their work is fucking awesome, and I love that they do that. I think it's a good reminder. Anyway, I'll see you all later. I'm gonna eat some lunch and I'll be back probably like 3 p.m. Eastern time at the absolute latest, but I'm really just gonna get back on whenever I finish lunch, so I'll see you then. Thanks again for hanging out. I hope you're getting something out of it. I'll see you all later, okay? See ya, Ed. I'll see you later.